Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, I'd say we're going to do the big stories of the week, but the big stories of the week are reoccurring stories. The budget, Kathleen Kane, and more. We'll get to all of those in a moment.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, it wouldn't be the state capitol if we weren't talking about all kinds of news with the state budget. And, of course, the Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania, Kathleen Kane, is every week in the news. We got it all covered here. Sitting next to me is Pete Muntean. He's the Capitol reporter for WGAL-TV. And across from me, Robert Swift with Times-Shamrock newspapers, and John Micek, the editorial page editor of the Patriot News PennLive. All right, I almost don't know where to start with this, as you're all laughing. So, John, you set the stage for this. We've got this budget. The Republicans put a plan on the table, and they say, Governor Wolf, I'm handing it to you. Take it or leave it. Do I got that about right?
Yeah, you know, we're into, what was this, week 7 going into week 8 on a Sunday morning before, with the great budget deadlock of 2015. Yeah, so last week, we sit here taping on a Thursday. So,
right.
Legislative Republicans walked into Governor Wolf's office on the second floor of the Capitol, threw an offer down on the table, essentially swapping pension reform for school funding. The Repubs said, you give us kind of our version of pension reform, we'll give you the full $400 billion increase you're looking for in the basic education subsidy. They said,
and that's a big deal.
No, that's huge. That's,
for Wolf.
For Wolf, that's mega. I mean, that's one of the main planks in his budgetary platform. So he gets that win, declare victory, go home. Jake Corman, the Senate Majority Leader from Centre County, said we're not expecting a counteroffer. It's this, or we're doing stopgaps. Maybe we're thinking overrides. There's supposed to be maybe another meeting last week. As we sit here taping, that doesn't look like it's going to happen, and maybe it will happen, next week. So things are kind of up in the air at the moment.
There are a lot of people who are starting to feel some pain. Robert, you did some stories on this, right? Pain out there among Pennsylvanians, right?
The two that are hit most are the nonprofit agencies that do a whole range of human services, and they're missing payments since July 1st, and then the county agencies that are often the conduit of funds for them. And so what's happening now, the United Way of Pennsylvania has done a survey, and about 300 agencies responding. About 60% are getting ready to start borrowing money to get through this because they're running out of money. Others are at the stage where they're going to start cutting back programs or, staff layoffs on a temporary basis. Some of the counties now county agencies have already started to take out lines of credit. Some have already started.
More money, in other words, they have to pay to borrow the money, right, guys?
They have to pay money on interest. Yeah. One major move, I think, by Governor Wolf this week was that he did say that the final budget should have the state reimbursing interest costs for smaller nonprofits and school districts. In 2009, the nonprofits did not get that kind of reimbursement, and they spent years trying to pay it back.
All right, liquor. How does that all fit? I mean, no, we're not drinking it here. That's water.
Well,
I want to point that out.
Human service agencies too, because the interest is a huge deal for these agencies. Especially, I went to the Lebanon County Sexual Assault Resource Center, and their interest that they would have to take out on this line of credit is to the tune of $6 grand. That's a really big deal for an organization that works paycheck to paycheck. You should ask Micek about liquor.
Yeah,
he's the liquor expert.
All right, John.
Pete, let me just finish the thought here. Pete's correct. We ran an op-ed on PennLive last week from sort of the umbrella regional agency for central Pennsylvania, who said, well, it's all well and good for the governor to say, well, just take out a loan. It's a temporary inconvenience. But Pete's right. These folks cannot afford the interest payments. So for Wolf to throw the reimbursement thing on the table is pretty big.
Liquor.
It's too early for me to start
wait a minute.
drinking.
I read at the end of a couple of the stories that, there's liquor and maybe it's part of it, maybe it's... Do we really know?
Well, that's the thing. It wasn't, from what we can tell, it doesn't look like booze was part of the take it or leave it that the Republicans threw on the table. But when they came out of that session with Governor Wolf on Wednesday last, Dave Reed, the House Majority Leader, said, we're looking at a $300 million increase to what we were going to give Wolf in education funding. I know a quick and easy way to get $200 million, if you know what I'm saying. And that's through liquor privatization. And he said that not once, not twice, but 3 times, which suggested to me that even though it wasn't part of the take it or leave it, that it's going to be a major negotiating point for Republicans.
Robert, this is, I think you would all agree with this. This looks like the first substantive movement that we've seen. Where it goes, we don't know. First Go ahead.
It's the first time that we've seen any. Wolf had a smaller pension thing the week before, but the first time in this whole thing, we've started to see any talk of compromise beyond the daily electronic war over, who did the right on June 30th. So this is a big deal. It's also schools are coming back, starting the fall year. Yeah. It's not surprising we're seeing this right now.
The governor really would have a problem with, ending liquor monopoly. I'll put it that way. Liquor stores under state control. 4,500 jobs.
And he's stayed true to modernization. He wants to increase Sunday sales, increase sales in grocery stores, not really change the status quo in a big way.
Right.
You can read that as he probably doesn't want to upset the union that is for those employees. So it's tough for him to go back from that. I think that he doesn't really, he said through the campaign, and he's maintained that now in office, that he doesn't want to get away from liquor modernization. So I guess we'll see.
All right, we're going to run to a break of a subject. It's talk about reoccurring subjects. Kathleen Kane, some new news this past week on her status. We'll get to that and some other things. Back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
All right, welcome back to the show. Pete Muntean, John Micek, and Robert Swift, journalists covering all things Harrisburg. Robert, before we get to Kathleen Kane, I'm still a little confused about what they referred to, the Republicans did this past week, as reoccurring revenues. They didn't mention shale tax, but they want to spend $300 million more for school subsidy, right?
That was sort of left vague after Senator Vince Hughes of Philadelphia, a Democrat, came up and said that. He said we were not reporting that big thing out of this was that they were saying a severance tax on natural gas production was off the table completely. That's something Governor Wolf campaigned on last year. So you get into the question of where's the recurring revenue. You have the Republicans saying, well, the recurring revenues, Wolf has to, you take the bill we passed, the liquor divestiture bill, for that revenue.
Right.
The question is, what are things out there that aren't broad-based taxes?
I got it.
Do you go back to tax on smoking like you did in 2009?
Right. But it's unlikely. I want to get to Kane, but it's unlikely that the Republicans are going to be big on finding a new source of revenue that's, that they've campaigned against.
Well, I mean, they've drawn an interesting line here. They're saying they wouldn't support broad-based tax increases, PIT or sales, if it's used to balance the general fund.
Right.
But if it's dedicated to property tax reform, which is still a part of this conversation, they might be.
Road.
Well, but to do a property tax bill, Terry, there has to be a shift of some kind. So they've sort of tried to break that off from the main budget talks here.
All right. Last week, some more activity with Kane. Gene Stilp, an activist, has filed a statement with the State Ethics Commission.
And don't forget the porn emails, too.
We'll get to that. Let's do it. So where does this all stand? What is Stilp arguing that Kane did?
Well, Stilp insists that Kane use public funds for her private defense. Remember, this is the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Kathleen Kane, not the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus the Office of Attorney General.
Right.
So whether or not that big press conference that she held to proclaim innocence and say, hey, look at these porn emails, that'll prove that I'm also innocent and the victim of a big conspiracy, whether that was taxpayer money that went to pay for that. At the press conference, something you kind of didn't see in a lot of our coverage is Chuck Gardo, Kathleen Kane's official spokesperson, showed us a blank check to say,
did you fill it in like Pete Muntean or pay me what?
It would be nice. But showed us this check to say that the Commonwealth of Media Services was getting some money from Kathleen Kane herself. But now this ethics complaint calls into question her security detail and other peripheral things like that, whether or not that's being used to sort of help her through this defense of hers.
John, I mean, this is amazing. Now, after the Attorney General said she wanted the Montgomery County District Attorney or the judge that presides over the state grand jury, to give her permission to release the email. We find that the Supreme Court told her in December of 2014, you have them. You can, or am I wrong about this?
No, it's like some sort of perverse Glinda the Good Witch. Well, you had the power to release them all along, didn't you? Yeah, just when you think like this whole telenovela surrounding Kathleen Kane can't get any stranger, I mean, something comes along and makes it like even more profoundly weird. And so, yeah, we have like the Supreme Court saying last week that you have them and you can release them. And now they're sort of bickering over the status of these protective orders that Judge William Carpenter, who supervised the grand jury down there, imposed to protect her from retaliation. But we've got Ron Castile, the former state Supreme Court Chief Justice, retired in the last year, saying that she can do release in the public interest that doesn't run afoul of Carpenter's protective order.
But Carpenter said, if I got this right, in the only statement he made, that she has them and she can release them also, Robert. I mean, where does all this go?
Well,
I mean, can she release this email or not?
I've been somewhat, over the years, I find the Pennsylvania court system to be not transparent. And part of it is these,
the reporters here are smiling.
Afternoon, 3 to 4 o'clock, they suddenly, there's a court order and they're unsealing this document and there's no real explanation of what they're doing or what's behind it. And I just find it a real lack of transparency with that. And they keep on, and supposedly there's more orders that may be unsealed. Who actually in the court unsealed it, what judge, why were they sealed in the first place? A lot of questions were left hanging from that.
Yeah, they're very much for these what are known as per curiam statements, where it's one sentence or two sentences saying such and such has been unsealed by, on such and such a date, signed somebody, and then there's no explanation beyond that.
And Kane's attorneys sort of maintain in their most recent statement that these porn emails that Kane says will exonerate her will come out in court. There won't be. She promised at her last press conference that she would have another press conference when she was finally able to release it.
At that press conference.
Right.
Where she didn't take questions. But now she's saying now this next event, whenever it's held, that she will stand there with her lawyers, go through it in detail, and answer every question under the sun.
And show that she's innocent.
Yeah, which, as Pete says, who knows.
But hold it. Let me qualify. Okay, if I'm summarizing this right, it's my understanding she has the emails in her possession because we know that she's released some earlier.
Some of them, right.
And so she has them. She knows the names of the people. She could, and now we think the courts have said, she can release them. We're going to run to a break. Well, why doesn't she release them? Does that mean her defense? She's going to wait and take them into court, but not. She's already released initially 8 of them. It's cost, by my count, 14 or 15 people their jobs, not just people in Harrisburg. I'm filibustering here. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania, and by the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, representing companies involved in America's most affordable, reliable energy source. To learn more, visit pacoalalliance.com.
Welcome back. John Micek, Robert Swift, Pete Muntean, both reporters covering all things occurring in the state capitol. Pete, the Attorney General has another day in court. Is that the accurate way to put it?
Her arraignment on Monday the 24th.
Yeah.
And it'll certainly be a media roadshow for all of us, a circus, if you will. I mean, every media outlet in the state will be there. The big questions are, what's she going to plead? Likely not guilty. And will she take any questions? I mean, she hasn't really taken any questions openly throughout any of this. Even reporters who interrupted her only press conference since she was charged weren't able to get a straight answer from her. So hopefully we can maybe get something more and get some indication from Kane about where she's going to go next.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, you two in particular, a long time you've covered it. Arraignments aren't usually the time, Robert, I'll go to you, you're the historian here. Is that when they usually make a lot of statements about it? Don't they just say, we'll defend in court and we'll defend? Go ahead.
Part of it is that the prosecution has to start to show a little bit about why it thinks it has a case, reveal some of that, but not all.
Okay.
And you're right, the defendant, is not likely to get too much into their defense at all. And sometimes it happens, this is happening relatively quickly.
Right.
Normally it gets postponed. I think the Steve Reed, who was charged back in July, that arraignment has not happened
This
yet.
thing has more moving parts than a train. But let's go to this, John. I'll start with, okay, there are two other possibilities. One, perhaps not. She could have her license suspended, and there have been at least one complaint that I know about to the disciplinary board, the state Supreme Court's disciplinary board, that says suspend her.
Yeah.
Which means what?
Means they could yank her license, and if they yank her license, it means under the state constitution you cannot serve as Attorney General, so off she goes. That is the most expeditious route to get there, and that well could be in process even now, as RB alluded to a moment ago. It is not exactly a paragon of transparency, but the Supreme Court has ultimate say over the licensing and conduct of every single lawyer practicing, like from traffic tickets all the way up until capital murder cases.
Yeah, go ahead.
Here's the thing with that. This once again, it's a confidential process. If that order was to come down, we could happen subtly without any advance public warning between 3 and 4 o'clock on a weekday afternoon.
Yeah.
And so
maybe a Friday.
Maybe a Friday, yeah.
Wasn't it you that reported it could come like via a tweet?
They also they tweet
don't
and
tell
post
me
it.
that.
They also tweet it too. So that's how this could happen.
All right, John, the other possibility, and I think it's pretty remote, is to have the legislature go through an impeachment. But here's an interesting question. Virtually every Democrat you can find has said, step down.
Yeah.
Attorney General, step down. You deserve your day in court. You're innocent until... I think Representative Mike Sterla from Lancaster, who's one of the leaders in the Democratic House caucus, has defended her. He's the only one that I've seen. Now, it could be others.
Ed Rendell has.
Not lately?
Recently, I think so. Yeah.
Really? Okay. But not many. So Democrats, would they be put in the spot if Republicans move an impeachment bill? Resolution. Here's why. That just means she loses her job, which is what they want. There's no criminal penalty, but what are the likelihood that given?
That's a long, slow process. And interestingly, I think that's why you've seen the Senate Republicans kind of remain artfully silent over there. Because keep in mind, the Senate would be the trying body.
That's correct.
In an impeachment proceeding. So if they say, well, we think she should go, and then they get sent an impeachment resolution for a trial for Attorney General Kane, that sort of tips their hand on the way the majority over there might rule.
But they need 2/3. They need Democrats.
And there will probably be Democrats who would vote for such a resolution. For Democrats to sort of come out and publicly vote against one of their own.
Yeah, it puts them
in a bind. It's much easier for them to say you should voluntarily fall on your sword.
Yeah, go ahead.
The House Minority Leader Frank Dermody, who was a prosecutor in the last impeachment we had of 1994 Supreme Court Justice Rolf Larson, he said when you do that, you're nullifying an election.
Yeah, well, that's a good
serious
point.
business.
All right.
It's a slow process, too. This would take months compared to a disciplinary board yanking of her legal license. We talked about the immediacy of that, but look how fast the legislature moves on everything. It's not a particularly fast pace.
We got to run to a break. When I come back, I want to just a few minutes on the U.S. Senate race. But in the final analysis, one-word answer. Does she hang in? Just really hang in? Doesn't resign, just stays where she is?
That seems to be the case now, at least.
Robert, you've had to guess.
I just don't think she's going to be hanging in there for
You
long.
don't? Okay, what do you think?
I see your stand.
Okay, 2-1. I don't know. The host doesn't take a view. All right, when we come back, the U.S. Senate race, Democratic primary, it's going to get hot and it's going to get interesting.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Business Council and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation.
All right, final segment, U.S. Senate race, particularly Democratic primary with Pete Muntean, Robert Swift, and John Micek. All right, John, it looks like the Democrats are in for an old-fashioned brawl. Maybe, maybe not. What's your take?
We've got Katie McGinty, the former Wolf administration aide, who has since jumped into the race to the surprise of exactly nobody. Everyone saw that. Everyone saw that coming.
Exactly.
But speaking to the deep desire on the part of a lot of establishment Democrats to find some alternative to former Congressman Joe Sestak, who had been the only horse in the race for a few weeks after the demise of Ed Pawlowski's campaign from Allentown. She's picked up some establishment support. As we noted, Ed Rendell, the former governor, is the honorary chairperson of her campaign. She picked up a bunch of endorsements last week. So Katie is no shrinking violet. She's a fighter, and it'll be an interesting race.
Yep. I'll tell you what, Robert, you covered Arlen Specter, and one thing to point out about Joe Sestak, when he ran against Pat Toomey in 2010, I think he out-hustled in that race almost anything that Arlen Specter did, who used to boast. How many counties did he say?
He boasted he went to 67 counties, and now Sestak launched his walking tour back in, I think, January, February of the state, and he has this logo as a pair of shoes, hiking shoes.
Gosh.
In Pennsylvania, in the past, especially with Senate races, they've responded to that kind of campaign in the past. Also, I think that in the case with Toomey, I think that it'd be interesting to see. We've gone through a situation where Governor Corbett was ousted. Senator Specter did not win the primary in the last round. Has Pennsylvania gotten over kicking out some of these top people? Have they purged enough blood, or is it still turmoil for sitting politicians?
Yeah, but this race is going to heat up.
Well, the state GOP has already switched, to borrow a Top Gun line, one of my favorites, switching from missiles to guns on Katie McGinty. I had to do it.
That's all right. So they're going heavy.
Well, and they've registered Katie McGinty for Senate.com and have posted her results from the Democratic gubernatorial race where she was near the bottom.
Yeah.
So they really want to try and dog her out of the gate, and she's trying to stay strong.
One dynamic, though, next year's a presidential year, and Pennsylvania's gone heavy blue for a president for the last 25 years. Does that lead down the ticket? And the other challenge, of course, is kicking out an incumbent. You have to provide a compelling narrative. And the question you need to ask is, has Pat Toomey done enough wrong to provide voters a reason to get rid of him?
We're almost out of time. Again, Robert, you've covered a lot of these. I'm not predicting, but Toomey's going to be harder to beat than people think. Yes or no?
I think it's going to be hard to beat. I think that senators have been vulnerable in the past. I don't think they're in the mood right now. Maybe
this is going to be a tough one. All right, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, stay well.